It all started on a regular Tuesday morning. The office was buzzing, as usual, with the sound of keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and people chatting. I sat at my desk, typing away at my latest project, when Jake walked past. He was a colleague I'd known for a while, but we hadn't really spent much time together. He worked in another department, so our interactions were usually brief and professional. But there was something about him that caught my attention. Maybe it was his easy smile, or the way he always seemed calm, even under pressure. He had a certain charm about him that made him stand out, even in a crowded office. That day, however, he stopped by my desk, asking if I'd like to join him for a quick coffee break. It wasn't unusual to grab a coffee with a colleague, and we talked a few times before about the latest office gossip or the challenges of our projects. But this time, there was a certain warmth to his invitation that felt different. I hesitated for a moment, but then agreed, figuring there was no harm in it. We headed to the small cafe around the corner, a quiet little spot where many of the office workers went to escape the constant noise of the building. We grabbed our drinks and sat down at a small table in the corner. As we sipped our coffee, we began talking more freely than usual. Jake asked me about my life outside of work, what I liked to do, how long I'd been married, and if I had any hobbies. I answered, but I noticed how easy it was to talk to him. His questions weren't just small talk, they were genuine, making me feel heard and understood in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I hadn't told him much about the struggles in my marriage. Tom, my husband, and I had been having some issues lately, but I wasn't ready to share those details with anyone, especially not a coworker. Still, I felt myself opening up more than I had anticipated. I told Jake that Tom and I had been drifting apart, that there were days when it felt like we were more like roommates than a married couple. I didn't go into the specifics, how Tom was always busy with work and how I was constantly left to manage the household and our finances alone, but something about Jake's presence made me want to share. Jake listened intently, nodding in understanding. He told me that he had been in similar situations before, and I could tell that he wasn't just being polite. He was empathetic, and I appreciated his ability to listen without judgment. But as the conversation continued, I couldn't help but notice how close we were sitting, the space between us growing smaller with each passing minute. I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest, a mixture of relief and something else I couldn't quite identify. We finished our coffee, and Jake suggested we head back to the office. As we walked back, the conversation turned lighter, and we laughed at a silly comment he made about our boss. When we reached the office building, I felt a strange sense of reluctance to let the moment end. But we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Jake, how easy it had been to talk to him, how different he made me feel. I wasn't sure why, but I felt drawn to him in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just his charm or the way he looked at me, it was something deeper, something that felt almost magnetic. That evening, after work, Tom and I had one of our usual quiet dinners. We didn't talk much, Tom was distracted by his phone, and I was lost in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that something had changed in me. The conversation with Jake had awakened a part of me I hadn't even realized was dormant. And as much as I loved Tom, I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that craved something more. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights at the office, fleeting conversations with Jake, and the nagging sense that I was slowly losing control of something I couldn't quite define. One evening, after another long day at work, Jake and I found ourselves alone again. The office was empty, everyone else had gone home, and there was a sense of quiet intimacy in the air. We ended up talking again, this time about our lives, our dreams, and everything in between. And then, something happened, something I never thought would happen. One moment we were talking, the next we were standing close, our faces inches apart. I could feel the warmth of his breath, and before I knew it, we kissed. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated. It was a moment, a brief lapse in judgment, but it would change everything. The next few weeks were a blur, and I was living in a constant state of confusion. After that night with Jake, everything changed. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was a mistake, that I could move past it. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't. The guilt gnawed at me, and every time I saw Jake at work, that night would flash back, reminding me of everything I had done. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the fact that I had betrayed Tom, the man I had promised to love and cherish. But the worst part was that I couldn't even tell him. How could I? How could I look Tom in the eye and confess that I had been unfaithful to him? The idea of losing him, of seeing the pain in his eyes, was unbearable. So, I buried it deep inside, pretending everything was fine, as if nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew it had. I wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was my marriage. Then, I found out I was pregnant. I hadn't been feeling well for a few days, but I thought it was just stress from work, from everything weighing down on me. But when I missed my period, my heart sank. I knew something wasn't right. I bought a pregnancy test, not daring to hope, and when I saw the positive result, I felt my world crumble. I wasn't just pregnant, I was pregnant with Jake's child. In that moment, everything shifted. The guilt, the fear, the shame, it all hit me like a tidal wave. How was I going to tell Tom? How could I explain this? My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out, but there was no escaping the truth. I was trapped in a situation of my own making, and there was no easy way to fix it. For days, I couldn't bring myself to talk to Tom. I couldn't bear to look at him, knowing what I had done. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. I had to tell him. I couldn't keep hiding it from him. Finally, after days of torment, I sat down with him in the living room, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Tom was reading a book, his usual calm demeanor masking the tension that had been building between us. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my hands, but they shook uncontrollably. "Tom," I began, my voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important." He looked up from his book, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it?" His tone was calm, but I could hear the undertone of suspicion in his voice. I'm pregnant," I said, barely able to speak the words. "But it's not yours. It's Jake's." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't process what I had just said. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for his response. I couldn't look away from his face, searching for any hint of what he was thinking. "What do you mean?" he asked finally, his voice eerily calm. I made a mistake, Tom," I said, my voice breaking. "It happened when we were having some issues, and I don't want to hear this," he interrupted, his voice suddenly cold. "I don't want to hear how it happened. I want to know why you did it." "I don't know," I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "I don't know why I did it. I don't know what came over me. But it happened, and I can't take it back." Tom stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. I could hear his breath quickening, and I knew he was trying to hold it together, trying not to explode. But I could see the hurt in his eyes, the shock that was slowly turning into anger. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" "I didn't know until recently," I said, my voice almost inaudible. "I didn't want to tell you, Tom. I didn't want to hurt you." "You've already hurt me," he snapped, his voice rising. "You think this is easy for me? You think I'm just going to forgive you? Just like that?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was choking on my guilt, on the weight of the betrayal. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, was standing in front of me, and I had shattered everything we had. "Don't speak," he said harshly. "I need time." I need space. And just like that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the mess I had created. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and uncertainty. Tom had barely spoken to me since our conversation, and the house felt colder with each passing hour. I tried to reach out, to apologize, but he pushed me away every time. His silence was deafening, and every moment spent in that house felt like an eternity. I found myself consumed with thoughts of the future. What would happen to us? Could I fix this? Could I somehow make things right? But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the damage was irreversible. Tom was distant, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, and I could feel it in the way he avoided me, in the way his eyes hardened every time they met mine. I knew I had lost him. But there was something else hanging over me, a weight that I couldn't shake. I hadn't told him everything. I hadn't told him that Jake had offered to help me, to be there for me during the pregnancy. It had been a simple conversation at first. He was concerned for me, for what I was going through. But as the days passed, it became clear that Jake wasn't just offering support out of kindness. He wanted something more. The truth was, Jake had been persistent. He texted me almost every day, checking in, asking how I was doing, and reassuring me that he would be there to help me raise the child. It wasn't just about the pregnancy, it was about something else, something deeper. And as much as I tried to push him away, to remind myself that I was married to Tom, that I had a life with him, Jake's words started to seep into my mind. Maybe it was because Tom had been so distant, so cold. Maybe it was because I was feeling so lost. But with Jake, I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was one night, after another long, silent dinner with Tom, when I made the decision to meet Jake. I needed to talk to him. I needed to understand where we stood, what this meant for the future. Maybe it was a mistake, but in that moment, it felt like the only choice I had left. I met Jake at a bar down the street from our house, a quiet place where no one would recognize us. I had to lie to Tom, tell him I was going to visit a friend, but I knew it was the only way I could speak to Jake without raising suspicion. When I walked into the bar, Jake was already there, sitting at a table in the back. He stood up when he saw me, his smile warm and welcoming, but there was something different in his eyes. Something that made me feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. "Hey," I said, taking a seat across from him. "Hey," Jake replied, his voice soft. "How have you been?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Honestly, a mess." "I can imagine," he said, his tone sympathetic. "How's Tom?" I winced at the mention of his name. "He's not talking to me. He won't even look at me." "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "But you don't have to go through this alone." I shook my head. I shouldn't be going through this at all. I shouldn't have let things get this far. "You're human," Jake said, his eyes locking with mine. "We all make mistakes." I looked down at the table, avoiding his gaze. "But this isn't just a mistake, Jake. This is my life. This is my marriage. And I've ruined it." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "You haven't ruined anything. You're just lost. I get it. I've been there." I pulled my hand away, trying to keep some distance between us. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Jake. I don't know what I want. I don't know if I even deserve to be happy." "You deserve happiness," he said firmly. "You deserve someone who will be there for you, no matter what. And I'll be that person, if you'll let me." I felt a pang of guilt twist in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what Jake was offering, but part of me wanted to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe I did deserve something more than the cold, distant relationship I had with Tom. Maybe I did need to find a way to move forward, even if it meant letting go of everything I had known. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Tom. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. I couldn't put this off any longer. I had to face the consequences of my actions. "I have to go," I said, standing up quickly. "Tom wants to talk." Jake stood with me, his expression unreadable. "You know where to find me if you need me." I nodded, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. As I walked out of the bar, my heart was pounding. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep running from the truth. I walked back into the house with my heart racing, the message from Tom still fresh in my mind. I didn't know what he wanted to talk about, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I had kept so many secrets, buried so many truths, and now it felt like everything was coming to a head. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself knew that everything was about to fall apart. I found Tom sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, but his eyes weren't focused on anything. He wasn't watching. He was lost in his own thoughts, probably thinking about everything I had told him and the things I had left unsaid. The atmosphere between us was heavy, like an unspoken accusation hanging in the room. "Tom," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I got your message." He didn't respond at first, but I could see his jaw clench as he sat up straighter, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was anger in them, but it was mixed with something else, hurt. He wasn't just mad at me, he was devastated, and the weight of it almost made me break down. "I didn't want to do this," he began, his voice shaky but controlled. "But I need to know, and I need to hear it from you." I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you need to hear, Tom?" He looked at me with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "How long, Natalie? How long were you seeing him? How long were you lying to me?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had prepared myself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the raw emotion in his voice. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, was asking me to confess to something I couldn't undo. I didn't plan for this to happen, I stammered, my voice breaking. "It was a mistake, Tom. One huge mistake, and I regret it every day." He shook his head, his face filled with frustration. "A mistake? You're calling this a mistake? This isn't a mistake, Natalie. This is a betrayal. You betrayed me. You betrayed us." I felt the sting of his words, each one a sharp reminder of what I had done. He wasn't wrong. He had every right to feel the way he did. I had shattered his trust, and I couldn't take it back. But I had to try to explain, even if it was too late. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. But when he started being there for me, Stop," he cut me off, his voice now laced with anger. "I don't care what his excuses were. I care about you. I care about us. But now you've torn everything apart. You've broken me." I could see the pain in his eyes, the raw emotion that he was struggling to hide. It made me want to reach out, to apologize, to do anything to make this better. But I knew it was too late for apologies. Words weren't enough to heal the damage I had caused. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the tears finally coming. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could fix this." He stood up suddenly, his body tense with frustration. "You can't fix this, Natalie. You can't just apologize and make it go away. You've made your choice, and now we have to deal with the consequences." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there in the living room, neither of us knowing what to say next. I wanted to beg him to forgive me, to tell him that I loved him and that I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could fix this. I wasn't sure if he would ever be able to look at me the same way again. "I can't be with you right now," Tom said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I need space. I need time to figure this out. His words hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of me. I had expected anger, I had expected pain, but I hadn't expected him to say he needed time apart. It was as if everything I had feared had finally come true. Our marriage was falling apart. I understand, I said quietly, my throat tight. I'll give you whatever you need. He didn't respond, just walked past me and out of the room. I could hear the door to the bedroom slam shut, and I knew that this was it. The distance between us was growing with every passing second, and I wasn't sure if there was any way to bridge it. I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with the weight of everything that had just happened. I had ruined everything. I had ruined my marriage, and there was no going back. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. But even as the tears fell, I knew that they weren't enough to wash away the guilt, the regret, or the damage I had caused. My life was unraveling, and there was no way to stop it now. The days that followed were a blur of emptiness. Tom and I had not spoken since that fateful conversation, and the silence between us had become unbearable. I tried to fill the space with activities, distractions, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the truth. I had hurt him in ways I never thought possible, and now, I was left to deal with the aftermath. I spent most of my time alone, reflecting on everything, how I had gotten here, the mistakes I had made, and whether there was any way to fix it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Tom's silence wasn't just about the affair, it was about something deeper, something that had been slowly unraveling for months. Our marriage had been strained long before Jake entered the picture. We had both been distant, both had lost the connection that once made us so strong. And while I had made a monumental mistake, I couldn't ignore the fact that we had both contributed to this breakdown. One afternoon, after a long stretch of solitude, I found myself standing in front of our bedroom door, taking a deep breath before knocking. I had rehearsed what I was going to say, but nothing seemed right. I didn't know how to fix this or whether it was even possible, but I had to try. I couldn't let things end this way. Tom. I said, my voice soft, as I pushed the door open. He was sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his expression unreadable. The sight of him broke my heart all over again. I think we need to talk, I said, stepping inside the room. He didn't look up at first. The silence between us was thick, and I felt the weight of everything hanging in the air. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Natalie, he said quietly, his voice laced with pain. The words hit me like a punch. I had feared this moment, but hearing it out loud was different. The finality in his tone made it feel real, and the reality was devastating. I know, I whispered, feeling the sting of his words deep inside. I know I've hurt you. I've hurt us. And I can't undo what I've done. But I can try to fix it, Tom. I'll do anything to make things right. He shook his head slowly. You can't just fix this with words, Natalie. You can't just say, I'm sorry, and expect everything to go back to normal. I don't expect that, I said, my voice breaking. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If you'll give me the chance. Tom stood up, pacing the room for a moment, clearly conflicted. His fists clenched and unclenched as if he were fighting with himself, with what he felt and what he knew he needed to do. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't want to cry, not now. I needed to be strong for him, strong enough to face the consequences of my actions. I understand, I said softly. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm here. I'm still here, trying to fix what I broke. If you need space, I'll give it to you. If you need time, I'll give you that too. But I want you to know that I love you, Tom. And I'm willing to fight for us." For a moment, there was no response. The silence stretched between us, and I held my breath, hoping, praying that he would say something, anything. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice cracking as he said the words I had been longing to hear. "I don't know what the future holds for us," he said quietly, "but I'm not ready to give up yet. I'm willing to try, but we have a long way to go." I felt a rush of relief flood through me. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a glimmer of hope. A chance to rebuild what had been broken. "We'll take it one step at a time," I said, my voice steady now. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I won't give up on us." And with that, we both knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty and challenges. But in that moment, I felt something shift. There was hope, a small, fragile hope, that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. And that was all I needed to keep going. Subscribe to our channel for powerful real stories that touch your heart. Join a community where emotions run deep and every story brings a new perspective. Don't miss out, hit that bell for weekly updates.